Today on CityCast Boise, it's Friday, and I've got Blake Hunter and George Prentice with me to chat about the week's news. We're talking a surprisingly emotional mayoral forum, KTVB's recent debate, and why an editorial board endorsement is in need of a correction. Plus, our Halloweekend plans. It's Friday, October 27th. I'm Emma Arnold, and this is what Boise's talking about. Hi, Blake. Hi, George.
Hi.
Hey, Emma.
Let's jump right in because, Blake, I know last night you went to the, mayoral forum here at Trailhead. How did that go? What did you think?
Yeah, so this was put on by the Boise Metro Chamber, and it was like a Boise Young Professionals event. So it kind of had that bit of a twist on it. And I wanted to talk about it because it actually was very surprising. So the first hour of it was like a city council member meet and greet. Like 9 out of the 10 city council candidates were there. And then all 4 of the mayoral candidates were there. And so they were there for an actual forum that was moderated by the Boise Young Professionals. The 3 of us certainly, and I'm sure that a lot of listeners have watched some forums, read some articles about this. We know most of the main talking points as far as specifically Mike Masterson, the main challenger to incumbent Lauren McLean. We kind of know the big hits, but this one really was interesting kind of from the get-go. There was a lot of the responses to a lot of the questions and even kind of the main plot points of this election were pretty tame. Like there was the criticism was pretty tame. And then it got surprisingly very intimate and very like emotional. So they, in true like job interview fashion, one of the questions was like, tell us about a case of adversity that you've experienced and like how, how you would apply that to being mayor. And Mike Masterson goes first and starts telling a story about how he lost one of his kids at like a very young age when he was living in Wisconsin. And, he was a police sergeant at the time, I believe in Madison, and was like watching his 2 sons, and including an 18-month-old at the time, when he like lost track of him, and he ended up like passing away. And there's the story is elsewhere, but it was a really interesting turn of events for a mayoral forum, because then he is talking about what I learned from that is that like life is based on friendships and tomorrow isn't promised. And then Mayor McLean starts crying, and she tells a story about her son being in a bike accident during the last election, like in the height of the last election in 2019, and her son being completely unconscious and like having to get helicoptered to St. Al's, and like tells this story. And then Joe Evans comes up, another candidate, and he tells about serving in Afghanistan and his kind of disillusionment with the American military and providing intelligence for, and seeing U.S. allies work with people that he really could not stand. And then Aaron Reese talks about kind of his authority issues as kind of how he explained it. But he was talking about like speaking truth to power, and how everyone on the stage had actually been like really surprisingly kind to him throughout this whole process. And so it was truly just kind of out of nowhere. Like I feel like everyone in the crowd was just sitting there like expecting to hear all of the hits, and then it just got very emotional and really intimate and like very respectful. And it was still a mayoral debate. It was still a forum. They were still talking about all of their main like campaign points that they're running on. But I just thought it was a really interesting reflection, like a week and a half now out from Election Day on November 7th, for these candidates, especially like the front runners, Mayor McLean and Mike Masterson, to have this like deep connection on stage. And it was just like pretty shocking. And it was, I guess, sometimes, when you're watching elections, it can be a little bit disheartening and it can be just hard to keep track of. It was just nice to see people connecting in that way.
That is really surprising. I can't believe I missed it, to be honest. I mean, you know me, that's entirely my jam. So,
yeah, it is.
But that is, I'm glad that they were able to get that, because I do feel like that's something these debates have been lacking for me, is a real sense of who any of these candidates are as human beings. Because typically with these, you do get these canned answers. It's a real stark contrast, and no I'm not criticizing KTVB's debate between Mike Masterson and Mayor Lauren McLean at all, but it had very much the opposite feel of what you're describing.
Yes.
Very like standard, cut and dry answers, not a ton of back and forth between the candidates. So it's really interesting that ended up like that.
Yeah, it was interesting to see all of their reverence for one another, actually. And it was kind of an interesting crowd for it as well, because it was, a lot of the city council candidates stayed around for it. And so as them, a lot of campaign staff folks, and not a ton of other people. So that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it, because it was just such an interesting, not a lot of people were there for this, emotional connection that kind of sprung out of nowhere, it felt like.
I lay some of the blame on the campaigns for not being able to navigate making things personal, because everything is personal, certainly at a city level. And I have known Mike Masterson for quite some time, and I know of two other stories that involved his professional work as chief here that were extremely emotional and personal. So, but his campaign probably, number one, doesn't know about them. Number two, doesn't think that there's value to that. But let's paint a word picture with these people. Let's make them human beings, right? And then Lauren McLean, I've known her for years, long before she was even in public service. But the fact is, just a few years ago, there were people outside her home with pitchforks and torches at the height of the pandemic. And she had to navigate that and then face her family and say, is this worth it? Is this worth it? I think people can relate to all of these stories. Aaron Reese's story is heartbreaking. For goodness sakes, Joe Evans he is the very definition of working poor. And how many people can relate to that? So I also lay this at the feet, quite frankly, of my brethren, of my colleagues, not being able to truly throw out the rule book of what a forum, a debate, or an event should look like. For gosh sakes, throw away the talking points. Blake, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to your point, or I guess to the campaign's credit, I think that they are taking your note. I think that this really does feel like a bit of a turning point.
It may be too late.
Yeah, maybe too late. We're 10 days out. But it did it had that energy of like, okay, let's all settle down and let's be people.
I don't have a ton of experience. Is this, George, kind of how it maybe always goes? Is like you have to wait until the candidates are exhausted enough to finally get to a point where they are no longer able to regurgitate talking points easily? Like, does this always kind of happen toward 10 days out,
Not always, but quite frankly, it's usually one or two things that trigger that. So it's usually a conversation that they had maybe in the last week, or, you knock on enough doors and you talk to enough people, you will find something to relate to. And most of the things that we relate to are usually personal. We talk a lot about the debate over the zoning code, right? Well, anyone that was there that night of that vote remembers, and there weren't many people physically there, but that was an incredibly emotional night. Yeah, the vote was unanimous, and those are the numbers, and these are the exceptions to the rule. But that night was highly charged and emotional. Capture that, tell that story.
Mm. Yeah, that kind of came up. I saw some criticism of both candidates actually after the KTVB debate, feeling like neither one of them talked about policy a whole lot in the KTVB debate. And I think the questions they did, those guys did an amazing job with the questions and moderating. But at the same time, and some of the follow-up questions, like you said, Blake, were really illuminating for sure. Mm-hmm. But I saw some people criticizing Mayor McLean, saying, well, it seemed like she kind of kicked the can over on zoning code specifically down over to city council, saying, well, that's who they voted for it. It's them. They voted for it. Instead of maybe just like really owning the fact that she wanted that vote and she really pushed for it and saying, I think it's right for Boise, not saying, well, your representatives decided to do that. But I did see another really interesting thing actually during that in a follow-up question. And maybe I'm misreading this, but it seemed to me that when they asked them about some of the recent abortion laws that have gone through, and McLean reiterated her stance that the city of Boise would not be pushing to investigate doctors and women for abortion violations, and saying like, we're not going to make that a priority in the city of Boise. And then when they asked Mike Masterson about it, he said essentially, well, I think you can't pick and choose which laws to enforce. And I mean, from my own experience with the police, yes, you can. Absolutely. They do it all the time. So
for goodness sakes, so does that mean when the legislature tells the city of Boise you cannot have an energy code, when the legislature tells the city of Boise you have no say in whether even to ask voters if there should be a local option tax, when the legislature says, hey, the city of Boise, no, you can't have your own minimum wage no matter what your economy is. It's like, at what point is leadership defined by, hey, sorry, yeah, you may pass these laws because you're a supermajority, but that's not where we are, or at least can we not have a conversation? I did a sit down with Mike Masterson this week too that will air next week, and I gave him another opportunity to walk that back, but he doubled down and on the issue of abortion restrictions. And it's like, so basically what we're saying here is that you are okay with the Boise Police Department investigating and or arresting a woman and or a healthcare provider because of the change that was just passed through the legislature. Is that what you're saying? Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And I just want to say, too, in the KTVB debate, he did not waffle on it at all. Like, the question was, would you change the directive to stop preventing law enforcement investigations into people seeking abortions or their healthcare providers? And he said, absolutely. So, but again, and this is kind of the problem that's come up with Masterson many times throughout this campaign, the follow-up question is, okay, well, what is your policy? Do you just get rid of that resolution that the city passed? Which, yeah, like I said, that this has come up with several other issues, but he just said that he would change it. So no question on when, no question on exactly what that would look like, which is scary. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is the definition of, quite frankly, a big city mayor. A big city mayor has to navigate the city and get a sense of where the city is, as opposed to what's going on at the Capitol. It happens all across this nation, if not all around the world. Mayors basically stepping up for their city. I'm not saying Mike Masterson is wrong. I guess what I am saying is I'm really surprised that there's no nuance.
Yeah.
Yeah. When he said, that I think he sort of implied in that same debate that Mayor McLean doesn't have a good working relationship with the legislature because she pushes back on a lot of the laws they make. And he was like, if I was mayor, I would have a better working relationship with the legislature. And I'm like, I don't care. Yeah. I've lived in Boise since 1990. Like, we've never had a great relationship with the legislature, not since Cecil Andrus has been gone, I think it's gotten worse and worse over the years, obviously, especially in the last 5.
And the last time I checked, there were 2 parties over at that building.
Yeah.
I mean, one may have the majority. So, in other words, relationship with the legislature. I am certain that both candidates have a decent relationship with some people over there. But to say not just because you disagree with the majority doesn't mean you don't have a good relationship with the legislature.
George, you said that you had something about the Masterson campaign that you wanted to talk about. So why don't you give us the juice on that? What's going on?
So I had never heard of this. So help me out, guys. Have you ever heard of something called Boise Insight?
Yes.
I have not. No, Blake has. So
just in the past 2 weeks, I think I know where this is going, but carry on.
Yeah. So I did not. That said, I don't spend a lot of time kind of circling the drain because there's a lot of nonprofits and that certainly some surface in a political year and go away as soon as the election's over. So according to their website, they are a nonprofit public benefit corporation that says too much of the local media relies on friendly relationships with the local government, big business, and their legions of PR professionals. Okay, fine. That's great. I actually agree with some of that. And someone had to point me to this that has no dog in the fight of this campaign. And they said, have you read their editorial where they support Mike Masterson's campaign? It's like, no, why would I? It's like, well, you need to read it. And in this editorial, and I'm going to quote it here, it says, a Boise State Public Radio News article perfectly describes the dichotomy between the two candidates. McLean, quote, my biggest concern is hearing my name on the radio or seeing my name in print. Masterson, quote, my biggest concern is making a difference. This is so far out of context, it's barely in the same solar system. So, folks, if you know anyone at Boise Insight and you are listening, please share with them what the truth is. And here it comes. That quote from Mayor McLean goes back to 2011. By the way, it wasn't Boise State Public Radio either, and there is no article that says that. I interviewed Lauren McLean before she ever stepped into public service. She had been asked by then Mayor Dave Beater to be on the Boise City Council, and so I said, hey, can we have coffee and just talk about what your expectations are, et cetera. And at the end of that conversation, I said, and like, what's your biggest fear? And she says, oh my gosh, it's just seeing my name in print or hearing on the radio. It's like, that's so foreign to me. That's what she said. That's what she said, and that was the context, right? Mike Masterson, when he said my biggest concern is making a difference, he said that a couple of weeks ago. Right? To put these on the, to correlate these two is so far off the mark. And then to make that a pillar of your editorial and endorsement for someone, guys, knock it off. Knock it off.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we've seen quite a lot of this with the Masterson McLean, like stuff that he isn't doing that he can disavow, but that his supporters are doing. Like, I don't know if you saw on the Mike Masterson Facebook page, people for Mike Masterson Facebook page, someone had posted a very, very racist video.
Oh, yeah.
Extremely racist puppet video and saying that police unions support Mike Masterson. And we also have that PAC ad that went out that was very anti-LGBTQ, that was very fear-mongery.
From the building group, right.
Building group, yeah. That, over and over, these supporters of Mike Masterson seem to be doing these things that he can disavow, but that are very incendiary, racist, or just plain inaccurate, like in this case with Boise Insight.
Yeah, and by the way, this is not a political action committee. This is an organization that is kind of putting itself out there as an alternative to the media, if not their own media. Yeah. And on their editorial board, is someone from communications from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, a civil engineer at the Boise Parks Association, an attorney, David King here in Boise, another attorney, Brian Ertz. These are supposed to be really smart people, and that's the editorial board. It's like, guys, you couldn't have been further off the mark. I could give a rat's ass about what someone thinks about what I say or don't say, but at least get it right.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I want to point out that at least as of 11:30 on Thursday morning, as we're recording this, Masterson has not disavowed that racist video that was put on his supporters page, which, of course, so many. If he does, this will be the third thing he's had to disavow in the last month.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, also, I just want to, just for fun, point out that the woman who made the video, the woman from Eagle, who made the video, a white woman, when people on Twitter were like, this is the most racist thing I've ever seen, she said, it can't be racist. It's a puppet. And I just wanted people to hear that coming out, that it couldn't possibly be racism because a puppet was doing it. Kind of feels a little, I don't know, sort of encompasses sort of that vibe of having people talk really serious shit for you and then being able to be like, it's a puppet. It's not me. It's a puppet,
For the record, and I've known Mike Masterson professionally for as long as he's been in Idaho. He would, this is absolute nonsense at best and incredibly repulsive. And he would probably be the second to say that. So you can't control the people who like you. That said, if they think they're helping you. It's like you guys couldn't be further off base.
I had a fan page on Facebook, and I kept tabs on it because people would post wild stuff, and I would have to delete it and have to block people, and ended up deleting the fan page entirely because I was like, no thanks, So I think like you are a little bit responsible for your followers. If you have, people saying that stuff, you need to be very, very clear and be very, very willing to lose followers, lose supporters who do that sort of thing, and be extremely clear. So yeah, that's very interesting about the Boise Insight thing, George. That's
and again, one more thing, and I know I've said this before, but ugly politics somehow does not get as much traction in the city of Boise as it would on a national level and even at a state level.
The person I saw tweet the puppet thing was Mayor McLean's campaign manager, and I think that was very smart to say, this is what the other side is using to promote their guy. I think that's probably smart campaign managing right there because Boise hates that crap, right? Like Boise does. Anytime anybody's gone real low like that, Boise is not into it. So. Well, we're just about out of time, but I want to hear what you doing this weekend. We got fun plans, either of you?
Do y'all know Ming Studios downtown?
Yes. Okay. And they just got a car smashed into them. Am I remembering that right?
So I think in like March or April, a truck just ran into the side of the building. There was a massive hole. And it took a while to patch up. They were also fixing up the floor and stuff too. But they are reopening this weekend. And I have a couple friends who are involved in like a recent film project about like INL and radioactive waste. So that's opening this weekend. So I just want to shout out Ming. I think that they do a lot of cool stuff. And now that they're back on their feet, they're probably going to need people to be going to their events and whatnot. So going to be doing that. And then probably a couple Halloween things. But honestly, Halloween feels pretty mellow this year. And I'll take it. I'm watching scary movies at home, but that's pretty much it.
That's great. What about you, George?
Well, speaking of which, I am revisiting a scary movie this weekend. I only try to watch it no more than once a year. Shameless plug on my show this week. I had a woman who wrote a book about the history of The Exorcist. And it was really interesting. And what she didn't know, and if I can just share just for a couple seconds here, I have my own little connection to that.
Oh.
I was certainly around when it opened 50 years ago in 1973. But when I was a freshman in college in 1975, my theology professor, and I went to a Franciscan university, he was a priest. He was a Franciscan, he was a friar, but a priest. And the course was psychical research, and he, in the 70s, worked for the Vatican in an institute that would investigate and debunk possible possessions. In other words, people would say things, but it was their job to debunk them, saying it was psychosis or whatever. He investigated and was involved in the original case. And by the way, The Exorcist is based on a real case. The original case of a boy in Maryland who indeed was possessed and that the Vatican agreed to an exorcism. And Father Alphonsus Trebold was my teacher. And a couple of years later, when I was out of college and I hosted my first I hosted a talk show, and I had him on the show. He was, I think, in his 80s, and he passed away 2 months later. But for 90 minutes, we talked about the original case that the book and then the movie was based on. And bottom line, he said it was much, much worse than any book could, and how that book portrayed. And I said, "Are you kidding me?" Because people passed out, when that movie came out. People were, throwing up like crazy in the bathroom, and it was insane when that movie came out. And to this day, it's considered one of the most provocative, if not one of the most terrifying movies in history. So I'm going to revisit that after having that conversation with her, because it really unearthed a lot of memories for me.
Wow. Where can we hear that 90-minute interview?
Yeah.
Where you got that in the archives, George? I need to hear that.
Well, it's he was this meek little bony man, with brown robe and the rope belt. The whole thing, and he giggled like that. But he
like
was
a ghost.
Well, but part of the theology course was about psychical research, right, and poltergeist and all that. But what was true and what wasn't? I don't believe in any of this nonsense until I ran into him. And the Washington Post wrote an article about this, about the original case of that boy who was possessed. And so it was in the Post. William Peter Blatty, the author, said, I want to write a book about that. Well, nobody would go on the record. So he turned it into a work of fiction and made it into The Exorcist. One other real quick story. So the book, when it came out, it did not do well, but he was booked on the Dick Cavett Show, which was a big late-night show on ABC opposite Johnny Carson. And Robert Shaw, who was the star of Jaws, who liked to drink, was the main guest. And he was bombed that night. And 50 minutes into the show, ABC said, get him off the air, get that author in here. And William Peter Blatty, for the better part of an hour and 15 minutes, talked about possession in America and this exorcism. The book became the number one book in the United States. It was a huge bestseller. And Hollywood's like, oh, wow, this would make a great movie. They hire the director who just won the Oscar for directing The French Connection, and you're off to the races. The Exorcist was nominated for 10 Oscars. I mean, it took horror movies to a new level.
This was not on my bingo card today.
No, it was not at all.
I'm sorry, guys. It's it's
amazing.
So many dots connect there. So
you're like the Kevin Bacon of The Exorcist. You have all these connections, 6 degrees of separation to The Exorcist. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, I am going to be cleaning my house because we have a big Halloween party every year. Pretty much mostly just family, but a few friends. But I have a very large family, as some people know.
What does a Halloween party look like, by the way, at your house?
Oh
what does that entail?
So I've been doing this for 20 years. Since my kids were babies, I've been having this Halloween party. And it used to be so big. And I was I was a homemaker. So it was full Martha Stewart, all the little treats, all the little handmade everything. And every year I would do a different theme. Like one year I set up downstairs and I had a tent and kids would come in and I was dressed up like a fortune teller and I would tell their fortunes. And we did something fun like that. One year we did a haunted maze in the basement. We did something different every single year. So
your basement is big enough to have a maze?
Well, it used to be. It used to be, but but then and it was so many kids, partly from I have a ton of nieces and nephews, but also we would invite a bunch of people and it was so big. You would have matching glow bracelets and necklaces. So you would be like, these kids and these adults are green group. You're in charge of keeping track of the kids in green group. And then we would go trick-or-treating and we would have this horde of children. And when we would knock on the doors, people would be like, ah! And it would just be all these kids. And you would be like, green group with me. And it was so organized, okay? It was so organized.
Gosh.
But over the years, I've gotten more and more tired. And obviously my kids are older now. And I keep trying to not do it. Also, Tuesday, October 31st is my wedding anniversary. We got married on Halloween, which I didn't do the math on having to every year on my wedding anniversary still have a party. But I've been trying to stop doing it for years. And my family's always like, nope. You can't. Nope. Not acceptable.
Emma, do you dress up?
I think this year what I'm doing is, I saw it on TikTok, I'm going to be Demi Moore from Ghost, and I'm going to print out a big Patrick Swayze head and put it on my shoulder, and then have a little pot on a thing around my neck, from the iconic Ghost scene of, playing with the pot. So yeah, that
Potter's
is maybe my costume. I wasn't going to dress up, but my kids got mad that I said I wasn't going to this year. They do every year. I'm like, I don't have time. And they're like, it's Halloween. So
okay, Blake,
we'll see.
Will you put a costume on?
Kind of. Yes. But my partner and my roommate and I are huge fans of Boy Genius, which is this indie band. And so we're dressing up as Boy Genius. And
cute.
So I'm going to be Lucy Dacus. And we all bought, this is the kicker. We kind of use this as an excuse. We bought matching suits from Banana Republic. They were on a really good sale.
Amazing.
And so we're going to have matching suits and we're getting little tooth enamel pins and other pins and stuff. It's inspired by their Rolling Stone cover. So yeah. That's the plan. And we're literally just going to someone's house.
Okay. I was going to say, will you hit the town like that? Because that sounds cool.
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not, but we'll see.
George, what's your costume?
I'm going as a public defender this year.
Ooh, sexy. I like it. Nice. I'm into it. Well, I love it. Blake, I cannot wait to see photos of this Boy Genius costume. Maybe that's a newsletter item for next week so people can see how
Maybe.
cute.
I'm testing different red lipsticks because Lucy Dacus has like a signature red. So I'm testing them.
Perfect.
Wow.
Okay. Well, happy almost Halloween to both of you, Halloween weekend, and thanks for being here. This was a great one. I appreciated hearing all your takes.
Thanks, Emma. Happy Halloween, everyone.
Thanks so much.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. The show was produced by Evelyn Avitia, A.K. Al Mootman, Grant Irving, and me, Emma Arnold. Blake Hunter writes our Hey Boise newsletter with help this week from Adrian Gonzalez and Natalia Aldana. And our music is by Up Is The Down Is The. If you enjoyed our show today, leave us a review. It helps other people find us. We'll be back Monday with more stories from around the city. Bye!